Jake Miller was worn to the bone that icy morning, finishing his overnight shift on a snow-covered construction site just outside town. He had barely enough gas in his truck to make it back home to his young son Max, and even less energy to face another day of juggling two jobs while still haunted by the loss of his wife. But fate never sends warnings before it changes a life forever. In the distance, Jake glimpsed something that would set in motion events he could never have predicted. He spotted a wrecked luxury car perched precariously on the thin ice of Lake Winfield, steam hissing around its broken hood. He only had seconds to decide. Keep driving, or stop and help. The choice he made in that moment would alter his world completely and lead him down a path he never imagined. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and if you enjoy this story, please hit the subscribe button, because I have something special for you tomorrow. The endless stretch of highway outside Jake Miller's window was little more than a smear of gray against the horizon. He had pulled a double shift at the factory, followed by hours of loading boxes at a local supermarket, all in an attempt to keep food on the table for his 10-year-old son Max. The road was covered in ice, and the early morning sun had barely begun to touch the frosty landscape. Jake squinted through his windshield, the heater rattling as it worked overtime to chase away the chill that clung to him. But his mind was too cluttered with worries to notice the cold. His wife's passing 3 years ago had forced him to become mother, father, and provider, all without respite. His heart felt heavy in his chest, not just from grief, but from the weight of his never-ending responsibilities. As he drove, the radio in his old pickup sputtered between static and a distant country station. Jake tried to focus on the music, hoping it would anchor him in something other than the fear of falling behind on rent. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of something peculiar. Off to the right, near the edge of Lake Winfield, he saw what looked like a high-end sedan. There was no movement around the car, yet steam rose from the engine. Drawing closer, he recognized that part of the hood was submerged in the ice-covered water. Immediately, the tension in his muscles surged. Was someone still inside? His first thought was that the driver might have swerved on the slippery road and crashed. Jake pulled onto the shoulder, not entirely sure of what he would find. The engine of his pickup coughed in protest as he turned the key to kill the ignition, but he ignored it. He jumped out into the biting wind, his boots crunching over dirty ice. He realized how precarious it was to go near the edge of the frozen lake alone, but the sense of duty that drove him every day compelled him now. He could not ignore another person in danger, especially if there was even a chance someone needed help. Slipping and nearly falling, Jake approached the car. Up close, it was clear that the front end had broken through the ice, and the driver's side door was blocked by a jagged sheet that formed a barrier. Frigid water was already lapping at the passenger seat inside. He peered through the driver's side window and saw a figure slumped against the steering wheel. Without waiting for another thought, he yanked at the door handle, but it was jammed. The edges were so warped by the crash that the mechanism refused to budge. A spark of panic coursed through Jake, but he gathered his strength and jammed his shoulder into the door. The frame gave a nauseating groan, but it refused to open more than a crack. Not wanting to waste precious seconds, he hurried around to the passenger side, stepping onto the ice. Splinters and cracks spread beneath his feet. He did not hesitate as he tested the door. It, too, was stuck. Pressing his face to the glass, he saw the same figure, a woman from the outline, leaning forward, unmoving. His heart hammered in his chest. The person inside was likely unconscious, and the water was creeping higher. The risk of the car plunging deeper was too great. Jake had no choice. He grabbed a nearby piece of broken bumper that had snapped off the vehicle, lifted it high, and smashed it against the passenger window. The first strike sent spiderweb cracks across the glass, but it held. On the second strike, it shattered inward, slicing into the cloth seat and letting in a wave of freezing lake water. Jake reached in, ignoring the shards that scraped his arms, and unlocked the passenger door from the inside. Then, he managed to open it just enough to slip himself in. His teeth chattered with the cold, and the smell of antifreeze and lake water filled the air. He carefully placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. She was slight in build, but wearing an expensive-looking coat, one that was now waterlogged and heavy. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks. Jake gently lifted her head, feeling for a pulse at her neck. Relief washed through him when he found it. Weak, but present. He had to pull her free before it was too late. With a grunt, Jake maneuvered her limp body so he could drag her across the passenger seat and out of the shattered window. The ice near the car groaned ominously under their combined weight, threatening to give way. The woman's head lolled onto his shoulder, and her face was deathly pale. Jake's limbs felt numb, but he forced himself to keep moving, stepping away from the wreck toward the bank. Every muscle tensed, as if he were walking on a minefield. The water at the edge seeped over his boots, and cold rivulets snaked up his ankles, soaking his pants. But after 10 agonizing steps, he made it to firmer ground. He felt a slight tremble in the woman's body, which was a good sign that she was still fighting for life. Jake placed her carefully on the icy ground. Adrenaline pumping, he saw her shallow breathing, and his mind shifted into a clarity that only pure survival instinct can bring. Quickly, he tilted her head back, checked her airway, and pressed his ear close to her mouth. Her breath was weak, so he administered several rescue breaths while feeling for a heartbeat. The woman's eyes fluttered behind closed lids, and Jake prayed she would open them. Then, a faint cough rattled through her body, water dribbling from her lips. He let out a tense exhale of relief. She was alive. Shaking with both cold and nerves, Jake reached for his phone and dialed 911. Glancing back at the crushed hood of the car, now sinking deeper into the water, he realized there was no time to wait. The next call was to the nearest hospital. He gave them the location, explained the accident, and scrambled back to his truck to grab blankets that he kept for roadside emergencies. By the time the paramedics arrived, the morning sun had started to rise, casting a weak golden glow over the ice. Jake stood aside as they rushed the woman into the ambulance. His clothes were soaked. His fingers hurt from the cold. Still, he felt compelled to speak to the paramedics about her condition. They assured him she was alive but in critical shape from hypothermia and water inhalation. Shaken to the core, Jake could only nod and watch as the ambulance drove off, sirens echoing into the white sky. He hoped the woman would survive. Once the taillights disappeared around a bend, he realized how tired he was and how close he came to losing his own life in the process. But despite everything, an odd sense of peace filled him. He had done the right thing, and that knowledge was enough to let him climb back into his old pickup and continue home, even if it meant his body would be stiff with cold and fear for days to come. Jake's house was a modest 2-bedroom on the outskirts of town, a simple structure that bore the signs of his ongoing struggle to maintain it. The paint was peeling in places, and the porch railing wobbled, but it was home. And inside, snuggled on the living room couch under a worn blanket, was the light of his life, 10-year-old Max. Jake could not help but smile, despite the chill that still gripped his bones, at the sight of his son waiting for him to return. Max was small for his age, with messy brown hair and big eyes that showed too much worry for a child. He jumped up the moment Jake stepped through the door, a look of alarm on his face. "Dad, what happened? You're soaked," Max exclaimed, rushing over. Jake's lips were still tinged with blue, and his teeth chattered as he tried to explain. He did not want to frighten his son, so he forced a smile and reassured him everything was fine. "Hey, buddy," Jake said gently, struggling to remove his boots without dripping a puddle everywhere. "I'm okay. Just had a little situation on the road." He could see questions forming in Max's eyes, so he decided to share some of the truth, though not the full extent. He did not want Max losing more sleep than he already did. "A car fell into the lake. I helped someone get out," Max gasped, his small hands flying to his mouth. "Did you save them? Are they okay?" He was breathless with concern, a reminder that beneath his youthful curiosity lay a heart as compassionate as Jake's. Jake patted his son's shoulder and nodded. "An ambulance took her to the hospital. She was alive when they left, so that's a good sign. Right now, I need a hot shower." Max quickly dashed to the bathroom to grab towels, reminding Jake in that small moment how precious it was to have someone waiting for him at home, looking out for him. The warmth in his son's eyes was enough to fortify him against the lingering chill that still clung to his skin. After Jake showered, the hot water stinging as it thawed his half-frozen body, he changed into dry clothes. He found Max in the kitchen, determinedly stirring a bowl of instant oatmeal. "I figured you might be hungry," Max said, his voice a little shy. Jake's eyes watered at the gesture. Sometimes, it was the smallest acts of kindness that felt the most profound. He thanked his son and ate the oatmeal in silence. Thoughts of the woman he had rescued kept slipping into his mind. He tried to tamp them down, reminding himself there were immediate problems to handle, like finding a way to pay the overdue electric bill. But the image of her pale face and her cold lips as he pulled her from the water stayed with him. Later, after he had tucked Max in for a short nap, Jake's phone rang. He quickly grabbed it, hoping for an update from the hospital. Instead, it was his supervisor from the construction site, demanding to know why Jake had failed to clock in for his second shift. Confusion and frustration rose in Jake's chest. "I worked a graveyard shift last night," he explained. "You said I could head home after that." The supervisor's tone bristled with impatience. "Well, we're short-staffed today. I expected you back, but never mind now. Just be here tomorrow morning, or I'll have to replace you." With that, the line went dead. Jake let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of financial desperation settle on his shoulders again. He had to keep this job, or he and Max would be in even deeper trouble. It was not lost on him that life never let him rest. The moment he tried to do something good, adversity rushed back in to remind him of his fragile position. As dusk fell, the events of that morning seemed more surreal than ever, like a fever dream. He found himself wondering who that woman was. The car, so sleek and expensive, suggested someone with status. He had never seen that kind of vehicle around these parts, where pickup trucks and used sedans were the norm. A small, wry smile tugged at his lips as he pictured the tabloids that sometimes ended up on supermarket shelves, the ones that described wealthy elites living in gated mansions. He never imagined tangling with someone from that world. Yet here he was, still shivering from the chill of the lake, while some unknown woman lay in a hospital bed somewhere, hopefully recovering. He tried calling the local hospital once, but because he was not a family member or listed emergency contact, privacy rules meant they would not give him any update. So he resigned himself to waiting. Maybe she would reach out if she remembered him. But that was assuming she did not suffer memory loss or something worse. Eventually, Jake shook off the guilt gnawing at him. He needed sleep. Another day would dawn, and he would face it like always, for Max's sake. Still, even as he lay in his own bed, eyes heavy, the memory of the broken ice, his frantic efforts, and the softness of the woman's breath against his ear continued to play through his mind. He wondered if he had done enough to ensure her survival, or if fate had other plans entirely. Days slipped by in a flurry of routine tasks and unending responsibilities. Jake rose before dawn to start his shift at the construction site, which involved hauling heavy equipment and braving the cold wind that swept through the unfinished building shells. Then he rushed to the supermarket for his second job, stocking shelves until late evening. By the time he stumbled back home, Max would usually be asleep. A hastily scribbled note on the kitchen table listing the homework he had done, the meals he had eaten, and a simple "good night, Dad, I love you," that simultaneously lifted Jake's heart and broke it with guilt. He hated missing these moments, but there was no choice. Throughout the hustle, the memory of that rescue lingered at the edge of Jake's thoughts. He often found himself watching the local news or scanning headlines on his phone during lunch breaks, hoping for any mention of a woman rescued from Lake Winfield. But there were no stories, no announcements, nothing that suggested the incident had ever happened. It was odd, especially given the fancy car. Usually, a crash in such a small town would be big news. The absence of any mention made Jake wonder if he had imagined the entire thing. Yet the cuts on his forearms, courtesy of shattered glass, told him otherwise. On a whim, he stopped by Lake Winfield one afternoon on his way home, curious if anything was left of the wreck. The shoreline was just a white expanse of ice, with no sign of the accident. It was as if the lake had swallowed that moment whole. He found himself fighting an irrational sense of worry about the woman's fate. He had no name, no way to contact her or even verify that she had survived. Realizing he could do nothing more, he tried to push it from his mind. Life had demands that refused to wait, like Max's upcoming science fair project and the water heater that was on its last legs. Jake spent what few free hours he had trying to fix leaks around the house, or cooking up small meals for Max to reheat when he came home from school. One evening, after finishing a particularly grueling shift, Jake was jolted by the sight of a note slipped under his front door. The paper was simple, folded in half. His name was written on the outside in neat handwriting. Curious, Jake opened it and found only 2 lines. "Thank you for saving my life. I'm sorry, but I cannot stay. You are a true hero. Mary." The symbol Jake was trying to avoid in the story is replaced with a comma, so we'll continue without using it. The note simply read, "You are a true hero, Mary." The abruptness of it made Jake's heart pound. He checked the envelope for more clues, but there was no return address, no phone number, just that simple message of gratitude and a name he suspected was fake. He stood there in the waning light, turning the note over in his hands, trying to decipher more from the script. Was it truly from the woman he rescued? If so, how did she know where he lived? A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The faint possibility that she was alive and well gave him some relief, but it also left him with a swirl of questions. Why had she disappeared? Why no mention in the news, or to the police? And, if this note was from her, why had she used the name Mary? It seemed so ordinary, as if chosen to avoid attention. The next day, Jake showed the note to a coworker at the construction site, hoping for advice, but his coworker only teased him about a secret admirer. At the supermarket, one of his colleagues offered a half-joking theory that maybe she was married to someone important or was in witness protection. Jake politely smiled but remained uneasy. He looked at the note one last time before locking it away in the small tin box that held important items like his marriage certificate and Max's birth certificate. For a man with barely any savings, that box was his only safe place for treasured possessions. This letter, cryptic though it was, felt significant. It was the only tangible connection he had to a moment that still haunted his dreams. Meanwhile, Max grew curious about the note as well, but Jake just said it was from someone thanking him for a favor. He could not figure out how to explain the complexities of the rescue without worrying his child. Life carried on, and Jake gradually accepted that he might never learn the truth. He resolved to continue working day and night, ensuring Max had what he needed. If Mary wanted to vanish from his life, so be it. She was alive, presumably, and that was all that mattered. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent, he would pull out the note and stare at the cursive letters, wondering about the woman's face, whether she had recovered fully, whether her eyes would light up if they ever met again. Winter had unleashed its full fury by the time February arrived, and the cold snap proved relentless. Jake worried about Max walking to and from school in sub-zero temperatures, but he did not have the flexibility to drive him every day. Budget constraints were tighter than ever. Heating bills soared, and groceries cost more than usual. Still, Jake did what he could. He made sure Max wore layers, stocked up on canned goods, and took on overtime whenever it was offered, even if it meant scraping by on only a few hours of sleep. One Thursday morning, Max woke up shivering, complaining of a sore throat and a headache. Jake felt his son's forehead and was alarmed by the fever. He told Max to stay home and rest, promising to pick up some medication after work. The boy mumbled a sleepy thanks, too feverish to argue, and curled up on the couch under blankets. Jake, battling guilt, had no choice but to go to his shift. The construction site had threatened layoffs if deadlines were not met, and Jake was already on thin ice with his supervisor. That day was grueling. A bitter wind whipped through the half-finished building, raising clouds of dust. Jake's fingers felt numb through his work gloves. The foreman barked orders, pushing everyone to work faster despite the conditions. By lunchtime, Jake was drenched in sweat beneath his thick coat, his body exhausted, but his mind racing with worry about Max. Finally, after putting in the required hours, he swung by the supermarket to grab cold medicine and some extra soup. He made it home just as dusk settled, breath steaming in the twilight. Inside, he found Max still curled up, looking no better. The boy could barely talk, and Jake realized with a sinking heart that Max was getting worse, not better. Over the next few days, the fever refused to break, and Max developed a raspy cough. Jake brought him to a small local clinic. The doctor on duty diagnosed an upper respiratory infection, prescribed antibiotics, and told them to come back if it got worse. For a while, Jake dared to hope that was enough. But the cough deepened, and Max's chest started to hurt. Soon he was struggling to breathe normally. Jake felt the panic rise in his chest. He had lost his wife to a sudden illness, and the thought of losing Max the same way was beyond terrifying. Rushing into the emergency room at the local hospital, Jake watched with a pounding heart as the doctors ran tests, hooking Max up to a machine that beeped ominously. The boy's blood oxygen levels were too low, and his fever was dangerously high. Jake stayed at his bedside, gripping his hand, whispering reassuring words about how everything would be okay. But the local hospital was not well equipped. They mentioned they lacked certain specialists, and that Max might need advanced care if his condition deteriorated further. Jake's throat felt tight with dread. How could he afford to send Max to a bigger hospital in the city, with specialized treatment? His insurance was minimal, and his savings were practically non-existent. Nights blurred into days as Jake sat by his son's bed, refusing to leave except when absolutely necessary. Each night, the same question burned in his mind. How would he pay for Max's care if it became critical? The nurse on duty encouraged him to explore financing options, sliding him a stack of paperwork that made Jake's head spin. He saw numbers so large, he felt a dizzy wave of hopelessness. He was a man living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to keep the heat on. Now, he faced the terrifying possibility that his boy needed more than he could provide. Late one evening, while Max slept fitfully, Jake stepped into the hospital hallway for a moment, staring at the rows of vending machines and flickering lights. The loneliness of the corridor seemed to echo his despair. He sank into a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, rubbing his eyes. If only fate would give him a break, just this once. He had done everything he could to raise Max, to provide for him since losing his wife. Was it too much to ask for a miracle? An older janitor, pushing a mop bucket, paused to give Jake a sympathetic nod. There was something in that stranger's look that was both comforting and heartbreaking. Jake wondered if the man had children of his own. Sometimes, a shared glance of compassion was all a person could give. Jake forced a tired smile in return, then got up and returned to Max's side, praying silently that his boy's strength would hold. Just when Jake felt the weight of desperation threatening to crush him, a phone call came that changed everything. He had dozed off in the chair by Max's bed, face pressed against his arms, when the buzz of his phone startled him awake. The display showed a number he did not recognize. With a frown, he answered, assuming it might be another collection agency or perhaps his supervisor demanding an update. Instead, a polite voice on the other end introduced herself as Ms. Keller, a representative from a private children's hospital in the city. "Mr. Miller," Ms. Keller began, her tone so calm and professional that Jake was immediately on edge. "We are calling to inform you that your son, Max, has been accepted into our intensive pediatric program for full medical care. All expenses have been covered. We're prepared to transfer him at your earliest convenience." Jake blinked, trying to chase away the fog in his brain. I think you have the wrong number," he said softly, heart pounding. "I never applied to a private hospital, and I certainly can't afford it." The woman's voice remained steady. "We have your son's details, including his diagnosis, and we're aware of your concerns. The cost is not a problem. Your son has been granted admission through a charitable endowment." Jake's thoughts whirled. A charitable endowment? He had never heard of anything like that. He glanced at Max, who lay pale and frail in the bed. "Are you sure? Who would pay for this?" Jake's voice trembled despite his efforts to keep it together. Ms. Keller replied, "I'm not at liberty to disclose the donor's identity. All I can say is that they are quite adamant about providing the best possible care for your son." Stunned into silence, Jake tried to gather his thoughts. This seemed like a gift from the heavens, a chance to save Max's life without drowning in medical debt. But it felt so unreal. Why would a stranger do this? And how did they know about Max's condition? All Ms. Keller would say was that they already had the medical team standing by, and they could arrange the ambulance transfer within hours if Jake agreed. Faced with this miraculous opportunity, Jake could only nod his acceptance. He was not in a position to refuse what sounded like a lifeline for his son. That afternoon, a special transport arrived to move Max to the private hospital, a sleek medical van staffed with nurses and state-of-the-art equipment. Jake rode alongside his son, still half convinced he was dreaming. The new facility was a far cry from their local hospital. Polished floors, modern equipment, and staff members who greeted them with welcoming smiles. The difference in ambiance was striking. There were bright murals on the walls, interactive play areas for children, and a sense of calm efficiency that made Jake realize he had entered a whole other world. Doctors immediately examined Max, hooking him up to advanced machines that monitored every vital sign. Specialists consulted on his case, and they did not waste a minute. Jake watched, overcome by relief, as the team administered new medications, adjusted the fourth fluids, and used technology that had not been available in their rural hospital. Within a day, Max's condition started to show signs of improvement. His fever dropped a few degrees, and his breathing eased. Jake felt like he could breathe again, though his mind still buzzed with questions about who was behind this miraculous intervention. In the quiet of the evening, as Max slept more peacefully than he had in days, Jake stepped into a nearby lounge for parents. It was tastefully decorated with soft couches and a coffee machine that dispensed lattes without charge. He sank into a chair, sipping a cup of hot chocolate, letting the warmth calm his jangling nerves. Several other parents were there, reading or quietly talking, but Jake felt too tense to socialize. All he could think about was the nameless donor who had saved Max. A wave of gratitude surged through him, mingled with uncertainty. Someone out there cared enough to intervene, but who? He turned on his phone to see if there were any missed calls or texts. Nothing but a new email from the local energy company reminding him of a delinquent bill. Shaking his head, he set the phone aside. Ms. Keller's instructions had been clear. The person funding Max's care did not wish to be identified. That was the only piece of information Jake had. But as he stared at his reflection in the lounge window, a slight suspicion pricked at his mind. Could this somehow be connected to the woman he rescued? He had assumed he would never hear from her again. Other than that cryptic note, could she be the mystery benefactor? The idea was both thrilling and impossible to confirm. Max's recovery proceeded rapidly in the private hospital. The doctors explained that early intervention with high-quality equipment and specialized medication made all the difference. Within a week, Max was sitting up, sipping soup, and even cracking a small smile at the cartoons on the TV in his private room. Jake felt tears threaten every time he watched his son's color return. Gratitude flowed through him like a steady current. His boy was healing, and that was everything. Even the bustling city outside could not distract Jake from the sense of awe he felt watching Max rebound from the brink of danger. While Max slept one afternoon, Jake took a walk through the hospital's corridors. He passed state-of-the-art labs and elegantly furnished patient areas, the kind of facility he never dreamed he would set foot in. He felt out of place in his worn jeans and scuffed boots among the visitors who breezed through in sharp business attire. A passing nurse offered a kind nod, which he returned with a polite but uncertain smile. The further he walked, the more he marveled at how meticulously everything was kept. The staff seemed highly trained, polite, and invested in their patients' comfort. Eventually, Jake ventured down a hallway that led to a small indoor garden, a peaceful space designed for quiet reflection. A glass ceiling allowed natural light to cascade over lush green plants. Wooden benches were arranged in a semicircle around a gently splashing fountain. Jake took a seat, inhaling the slightly humid air that carried the scent of fresh leaves, and exhaled in an attempt to dispel lingering stress. He closed his eyes for a moment, wishing that his wife could be there to witness Max's recovery. She would have been relieved, overjoyed that their son was receiving such expert care. A pang of loss struck him, but he replaced it with gratitude for the mysterious benefactor who made all this possible. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. Opening his eyes, he saw Ms. Keller approaching, wearing the same calm, professional demeanor as when she had first called him. She offered a gentle smile and took the bench across from him. "How are you holding up, Mr. Miller?" she asked. Jake found himself wanting to cut straight to the question that had been eating at him for days. "Ms. Keller, please, can you tell me anything at all about who's paying for my son's treatment? I'm beyond grateful, but I need to at least say thank you." Ms. Keller's expression turned sympathetic. "I understand your wish, but I'm only following instructions from our benefactor. They wish to remain anonymous, and it's part of our hospital's policy to honor such requests." She paused, as though choosing her words carefully. "They are aware you want to show gratitude, but they prefer privacy. Let's just say you and your son made an impression on them." Jake studied her face, trying to glean a hint or clue, but found only polite neutrality. When it was clear she would reveal nothing more, Jake sighed. "I respect that. I do. It just feels like I owe my son's life to them, and I can't even express it." Ms. Keller placed a comforting hand on Jake's shoulder. "Focus on your son right now. That's what this person wants. They're giving you the freedom to do that." She stood and excused herself, leaving Jake alone with the trickling sound of water in the fountain and the swirl of his own thoughts. One idea lingered in his mind above all others: the woman he pulled from Lake Winfield. Perhaps it was outlandish, but who else would have such deep pockets in the awareness of his situation? She must have done some digging, learned his name, discovered where he lived, and maybe she had followed his story from afar. That evening, Jake found Max awake and flipping through a comic book he had borrowed from the hospital's children's library. The color in his cheeks brought tears of relief to Jake's eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed, gently brushing aside Max's hair. The boy's forehead was still a little warm, but the worst of the fever had passed. "Dad," Max said quietly, "am I going to be okay? Are they going to let us stay here?" His voice carried a hesitant note, as if he expected they might be kicked out at any moment. Jake nodded, forcing a confident smile. "Yeah, buddy. The doctors say you're getting better every day. And as for how we're paying for it, well, someone is helping us, and that's all that matters right now." Max's eyes lit with gratitude. "I hope I can meet them," he said, echoing Jake's own desire. "Me too," Jake agreed. That night, as Max drifted off to sleep, Jake sat by the window, gazing at the city skyline. So many questions hung in the air. Who was the benefactor, and why keep it a secret? Yet despite the mystery, a quiet warmth settled in Jake's chest. Maybe not all acts of kindness needed a spotlight. Maybe some were meant to remain hidden, and the best way to repay them was to live life more fully. Still, curiosity and a lingering sense of connection pulled at Jake, making him wonder when or if the hidden thread of his fate would reveal itself. A few more days passed, and Max continued to improve under the care of specialists. Soon, he was strong enough to walk the hospital hallways with Jake at his side. The staff encouraged light exercise, so Jake guided Max slowly, letting the boy's feet adjust. The child's eyes shone with a mix of excitement and residual tiredness. Each step seemed to signal a return to life, a small victory over the infection that had threatened to take him away. That afternoon, Jake received unexpected news. One of the doctors informed him that Max could be discharged in a week if his condition kept improving. Relief flooded Jake. He thought about how he would manage once they left the hospital, given that he had been absent from his jobs for so long. But that was a secondary concern. Max's health came first. Yet, a new question gnawed at him. Who had arranged this miraculous rescue for his son? The sense that the entire puzzle pointed back to the mysterious woman he saved from the lake became stronger with each passing day. Determined to find answers, Jake decided to do some investigating. He borrowed a public computer in the hospital's library and began searching for any recent news of a luxury car accident near Lake Winfield. But he found nothing. No reports, no mention of a single car crash, and certainly nothing about a rescue. Frustrated, he tried searching for local billionaires, wealthy families, or big donors in the region, hoping to catch a clue. Again, he came up empty. The local community was not known for big money, and the wealthy lived in the city behind gates and anonymity. Jake was about to give up when he remembered that there was one small detail he had learned that day. the brand of the car. He recalled seeing the emblem on the grille before it sank into the lake. Typing in the make and model, he scrolled until he found a forum about luxury vehicles. He posted a brief question, describing the color and model he had seen. One user responded, pointing out that only a handful of those specific cars had been registered in the state. Another user mentioned an eccentric tech billionaire rumored to own a similar vehicle. Jake's pulse quickened. It was not proof, but it was a starting point. The name Olivia Hart surfaced in his search. She was a reclusive genius who had supposedly built a tech empire in her 20s, then vanished from the public eye after a personal tragedy. Jake clicked on an old article featuring a picture of her. She was younger then, wearing a sleek business suit, with striking eyes and a confident posture. The article said she had retreated from the business world. No details on what caused her seclusion, only speculation that something traumatic had happened in her personal life. No one knew her current whereabouts, though rumor had it she still lived somewhere in the region, rarely seen, never photographed. Could this mysterious Olivia Hart be the woman in the lake? Jake shut the computer, mind racing. The hospital bills, the lack of publicity around the accident, the secret note, it all lined up too well to be coincidence. Even if it was a stretch, it was the strongest lead he had. As he walked back to Max's room, the hallway lights reflected his furrowed brow. Could the reclusive billionaire have been the one behind the wheel that fateful morning? If so, she must have recognized him, found out about his son's illness, and used her considerable resources to save Max. But why hide? And why sign the note Mary? None of it made perfect sense, but it was a puzzle that Jake felt compelled to solve. That evening, after helping Max settle in for the night, Jake found a quiet corner in the hallway and placed a call to the hospital's billing department. He asked if he could see the name of the entity paying his bills. Unsurprisingly, the staff refused, citing confidentiality. Next, he tried Ms. Keller, but she politely reiterated the same line. The donor wished to remain anonymous. Frustration flared. Jake was not trying to unmask them out of a sense of entitlement. He simply wanted to express his gratitude, or at least understand the scope of what had been done for his child. Resigned, Jake stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. Snow flurries drifted lazily from a black sky, glowing under the hospital's floodlights. Clutching his jacket closer, he stared at the falling snow, each flake dissolving on the sidewalk. If Olivia Hart truly was behind this, Jake could only hope she would reveal herself in time. For now, he had no choice but to accept the gift she had given and focus on Max's recovery. Yet the thought that his fateful act on that frozen lake had led to his son's salvation lingered, creating a profound sense of wonder that overshadowed any resentment he might have felt at being kept in the dark. On the morning of Max's discharge, Jake was a bundle of nerves and excitement. The doctors had cleared Max for release, insisting that he continue with medications and follow-up appointments. Standing by the front desk, Jake took care of the last bits of paperwork, each signature reminding him that all costs were covered, an extravagant gift he still could not fully grasp. Max, looking a bit thin but definitely healthier, clutched a small stuffed animal the nurses had given him. He gazed around the sleek lobby with wide eyes, as though reluctant to leave this place that had become an unexpected sanctuary. They stepped outside into the crisp winter air. A medical transport van was ready to drive them home, courtesy of the hospital's arrangement. Jake insisted on trying to find Ms. Keller one last time to say goodbye, but the nurse at the front desk explained she was out of the building for a meeting. With a sigh, Jake ushered Max into the van, and they began the journey back to their little town, roads lined with snowbanks and the occasional skeletal tree. The difference between the polished city and their humble community struck Jake again. He wondered how Max would adjust after being in such a specialized place. The boy, however, seemed eager to return to the familiarity of his own bed and his old bedroom, adorned with posters of astronauts and galaxies. Upon arriving home, Jake carefully guided Max inside, where the air was cooler than it should have been because the furnace needed repairs. Max did not complain though, just settled onto the couch with a grateful sigh, pulling a blanket around his shoulders. After rummaging in the pantry, Jake whipped up a simple meal of chicken soup. "I missed your cooking, Dad," Max said, voice still scratchy but full of warmth. Jake felt a surge of emotion. "Well, kiddo, I missed you being healthy." They shared a tired smile, the kind that passes between two people who have weathered a storm and made it to safer shores. Later, as Max dozed off again, Jake went through the mail that had piled up. Bills, late notices, and a couple of final warnings cluttered the table. He exhaled heavily, bracing himself for the reality of how much he owed. But then, he spotted a clean white envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed note. "Glad your son is safe. Take care. M." It was even more concise than the first note. The signature was just Emily, likely short for the Mary name she had used before. Jake's hands trembled slightly, realization dawning that she was still watching over them. That meant she must be aware that Max was discharged, and that implied a level of closeness, or at least a network of resources providing her updates. It had to be Olivia Hart, right? Jake sank into a kitchen chair, rereading the note. If only there was a way to trace it back. He tried to steel himself against disappointment. Whoever she truly was, she did not seem ready to emerge from the shadows. Yet the note comforted him. It reminded him that this extraordinary kindness was real, not just some cosmic fluke. He tucked the note into the same tin box as the first, next to his most cherished memories. Then, realizing that not even a single day off was possible given his financial strain, he resolved to return to work the following morning. He left a message for both his employers, explaining that he was back in town and ready to resume shifts immediately. He had responsibilities after all, and a mountain of debt. Never mind that Max's hospital stay had been covered. They still had to eat, pay rent, and keep the lights on. As night fell, the house was silent, except for the hum of the aging fridge and the soft wind outside. Jake checked on Max one more time, placing a gentle hand on his forehead. The fever had not returned, and the boy was sleeping peacefully. A wave of love and relief washed over Jake so intense, it almost brought him to his knees. He whispered a silent thank you to the mysterious benefactor, certain more than ever that it was the woman he had saved. In the darkness, he allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would meet again, and this time he would be able to look her in the eye and say the words he so desperately needed to say. "Thank you." Jake's routine resumed, though it felt different after the intensity of Max's illness. He awoke before dawn, made sure Max had everything he needed for the day, and headed out to the construction site. The difference was that he no longer carried the same level of crushing despair. Knowing Max was safe and healthy elevated his mood. He worked more efficiently, even volunteering for extra hours when possible. The cold wind that whipped across the scaffolding did not cut as deeply when he remembered his son's warm smile at home. During lunch breaks, Jake occasionally scrolled through his phone, reading up on anything related to Olivia Hart. She was a mystery. No new pictures had surfaced in years. Rumors claimed she lived abroad or on a private estate in the mountains. Others said she was quietly investing in philanthropic ventures, never putting her name on any donation. Jake felt an odd sense of kinship with this elusive figure. On a practical level, if she really was the one who saved Max, he wanted to find a way to repay her kindness. But how do you repay a billionaire whose wealth renders any material gesture pointless? One day, on his way home, Jake decided to take a detour. He drove to Lake Winfield, the spot where the entire saga began. The ice had mostly melted now, leaving cold ripples dancing across the water's surface. Parking his truck, Jake stepped out and walked to the shoreline. He recalled how he had spotted the twisted metal and the steam rising from the car. He remembered the ice cracking beneath his feet, and the frantic effort to smash the window and haul the unconscious woman to safety. His breath caught in his throat as he relived those seconds. So much had changed since then. His son's life was saved by the very person he rescued, or so he believed. It was as if the lake had witnessed a transaction of fate, a cosmic exchange between two strangers. He closed his eyes, listening to the soft lapping of water against the shore. For a moment, he imagined a graceful figure appearing by his side, perhaps the woman herself, to thank him in person. But when he opened his eyes, the shoreline was empty, just bare trees and scattered gulls. Shaking off the reverie, Jake turned back to his truck. Maybe she would remain a phantom, a silent guardian who preferred anonymity. Yet, deep down, he felt that their paths were not done crossing. There was an unspoken bond now, too strong to be severed by secrecy. That evening at home, Jake grilled cheese sandwiches from Max, who sat at the small dining table flipping through his homework pages. The boy was slowly regaining his old energy, even cracking a joke or two about how much better the hospital food had been than Dad's cooking. Jake feigned an offended expression, wagging his spatula at Max, which made the kid grin. This simple domestic moment reminded Jake of why he pushed himself so hard. He asked Max about school, and the boy admitted he was behind on a few assignments, but was catching up fast. Jake promised to help him after dinner, setting aside an hour to go over math problems. These were the quiet blessings that reminded Jake life could still be good, that the worst storms eventually passed. When Max was in bed, Jake retrieved his tin box and reread both notes. The first scrawled in neat handwriting, the second typed. The signatures were short, the messages cryptic. He noticed something in the second note he had overlooked initially, the faintest watermark at the edge of the paper. It looked like a stylized letter H, though it was partially cut off. Could it be a personal monogram? Heart pounding, he wondered if the H stood for heart. It seemed likely. He pictured Olivia Hart, reclusive tech mogul, alone in her world of privilege and sorrow, quietly repaying him for an act of courage he had made without second thought. Jake eventually returned the notes to the box, sliding it under his bed. Another long day of work awaited. Even though his mind bristled with questions and the desire for closure, he told himself it was enough that Max was alive and well. Gratitude outweighed curiosity. He had no illusions that a man like him, barely scraping by, could easily confront or thank a billionaire. Perhaps, in her own time, she would step into the light. For now, the real triumph was seeing his son's face at the breakfast table every morning. Fate often has a way of revealing itself at the least expected moment. It happened on an unremarkable Tuesday, when Jake's supervisor at the supermarket asked him to handle a large delivery of stock that had come in early. Leery-eyed from his construction shift, Jake pulled into the supermarket loading bay, greeted by piles of boxes stacked on pallets. The forklift operator was late, so Jake had to unload by hand, not an unusual task for him. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, shifting the heavy boxes into the back room. A few hours into the job, while hoisting a particularly large box, Jake caught a flash of black in the corner of his vision. He glanced over to see a woman standing by the store's side entrance. She wore a dark coat, her hair partially hidden under a stylish hat. She seemed out of place in this setting, her posture poised, her eyes scanning the area. Then, in an instant, she turned away, disappearing around a corner. Jake's heart jerked in his chest. Her profile was vaguely familiar, reminiscent of the woman from Lake Winfield. Could it be her? No, it had to be his imagination. Why would she show up here, of all places? Curiosity sparked. He set down the box and walked briskly to the side entrance, stepping out into the cold. The parking lot behind the supermarket was nearly empty. He searched for a figure in a dark coat, but all he saw was a sedan pulling away, tinted windows reflecting the dull winter sky. Disappointment and confusion tangled in his mind. Maybe it was just a customer. But the sense that he had missed something important gnawed at him. Jake spent the rest of his shift distracted, eyes drifting to the windows, half expecting her to reappear. Once he was done, he hurried out to his truck. On the windshield, pinned under the wiper blade, was a small white envelope. He pulled it free. There was no name on the outside. Quickly, he slid his fingernail under the seal and opened it, heart pounding. A single sheet of paper bore a short typed message. "Meet me at Driftwood Cafe on Oak Street. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Come alone." It was signed, M. He stared at the note, adrenaline surging. She was here. She wanted to meet. His initial reaction was a wave of relief, quickly followed by anxiety. What did she want? Was it really the woman from the lake? Even if it was, how would he handle a conversation with someone so wealthy and secretive? But beyond everything else, A surge of excitement coursed through him. Finally, he might have a chance to say thank you, to learn the truth, to repay her kindness. The next day, Jake arranged for his neighbor, a kind retiree named Mrs. Baker, to watch Max. He told her he had a meeting, gave her a rushed explanation, and said he would be back around dinner time. The short drive to the Driftwood Cafe felt longer than it should. Jake's pulse thrummed as he parked on the street and walked up to the cozy little establishment. He had been there once or twice, a quiet place with wooden booths and an old-fashioned jukebox in the corner. The bell above the door chimed softly when he stepped inside. It was mid-afternoon, so only a few patrons sipped coffee or tapped on laptops. Jake scanned the tables, feeling that mixture of nerves and anticipation swirl in his stomach. In a corner booth, partially hidden by a tall fern, sat a woman in a simple yet elegant black sweater, her hair pulled back. Their eyes met, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat. It was the same face he had seen slumped over a steering wheel in a sinking car, though now her cheeks held more color, her posture was straight, and there was an unmistakable poise in the way she sat. He approached slowly, wiping his damp palms on his jeans. "Are you Mary?" he asked, voice hushed. She offered a small smile. "Yes, but my real name is Olivia. Olivia Hart." Hearing her say the name confirmed Jake's suspicions and sent a jolt through his body. He slid into the booth across from her, trying to steady his breathing. After months of mystery, the woman responsible for saving Max's life was right here, in this unassuming cafe. He studied her features, noting a slight tension around her eyes, as if she too was uncertain about this meeting. Jake summoned his courage. "Thank you. I don't even have the words. You saved my son's life. Idal." His throat tightened with emotion. Olivia's gaze flickered, betraying a hint of vulnerability. "You saved mine first," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. "I only did what seemed fair. You jumped into a freezing lake for a complete stranger. I'm not used to people doing things like that without expecting something in return." Jake's cheeks warmed with embarrassment and sincerity. "I couldn't just drive by." They fell silent for a few moments, the low hum of the cafe's background music filling the space. Finally, Olivia broke the tension. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I had reasons, but I kept track of you and your son. When I learned about his illness, I had to help." Jake nodded, new questions swirling in his mind. Why had she felt the need to hide? And what personal tragedy had driven her into seclusion? But he also understood that pressing her too hard might cause her to retreat again. So he opted for honesty, tempered with care. "I don't know how I could ever repay you," he whispered. "You gave me back my child. That's everything to me." Olivia reached across the table, placing her hand gently on top of his. Her skin was warm, and the contact sent a small shock of connection through Jake's body. "You don't owe me anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if you're open to it, I'd like to talk more. I want to know who you are, beyond the man who risked his life one cold morning. And maybe I'll share more about myself." Jake's heart pounded. He nodded, managing a faint smile. "I'd like that." And with those words, the invisible barrier between two worlds began to fade. The Driftwood Cafe meeting extended far longer than Jake expected. They ordered coffee and pastries to justify their continued presence in the booth. Olivia seemed guarded at first, but curiosity pushed her to ask about Jake's life. He spoke hesitantly, unsure if his struggles would bore someone who had everything at her fingertips. Yet, Olivia listened intently, her eyes reflecting empathy as he described working 2 jobs, raising Max alone, and the ache of losing his wife. She revealed only fragments of her own story in return. She admitted she had stepped away from her tech empire a few years back after losing someone close to her, though she did not specify who. She said she had grown tired of the media's intrusiveness. She took to driving by herself on back roads, always seeking solitude. That was how she ended up near Lake Winfield on the day of the accident. Jake tried to quell his lingering shock that he was sitting face to face with the elusive Olivia Hart. She was not what he expected a billionaire to be. She had a reserved grace, more sadness in her gaze than arrogance, and a genuine interest in his life that he found disarming. When he expressed gratitude again for saving Max, Olivia insisted on turning the conversation elsewhere, saying she only did what any decent person would do if they had the resources. Finally, she asked about Max, wanting to know how he was faring. Jake's face lit up as he described the boy's recovery. "He's still a bit weak, but every day he gets stronger," Jake said, his voice warm with relief. "I'd love for you to meet him, someday, when you're comfortable." Olivia's expression flickered with something akin to longing, mixed with caution. She murmured that she would consider it, but asked that Jake keep her identity private for now. She was not prepared to face paparazzi or the public if word got out that she was in town. "Of course," Jake reassured. "I'm not looking for publicity either. I never expected any of this. But I'm grateful." A small silence passed between them, charged with a mutual understanding that their lives had intersected in a way neither had asked for. Before they parted, Olivia slipped a business card into Jake's hand, though it bore no company name, just a private phone number and an email address. She made him promise to contact her if Max needed anything, no matter how small. Jake agreed. As they stood outside the cafe, the late afternoon sun casting soft shadows across the sidewalk, they exchanged a hesitant, meaningful smile. Then Olivia slipped into a sleek sedan waiting around the corner, and Jake watched her leave with a strange sense of optimism. Perhaps he had glimpsed the start of a rare friendship, or something more. Either way, the invisible gap between their worlds felt a bit narrower. That evening, Jake returned home to find Max building a makeshift fort out of couch cushions, his energy clearly returning. Mrs. Baker sat in a rocking chair, knitting, keeping an eye on him. After thanking her, Jake sank onto the couch, mind still buzzing from his encounter. Max tilted his head curiously. "You look like you just saw a ghost, Dad." Jake laughed softly. "In a way, I did." He ruffled Max's hair, deciding to keep the details vague for now. "I just had a really important meeting." Over the next few days, the winter chill began to ease, hinting at the approach of spring. Jake found himself checking his phone more frequently, half hoping Olivia would message him. He also wondered if he should reach out first, or if that might seem too forward. In the end, he settled on a simple text. "Thank you again for meeting me. I'm glad we finally talked." He pressed send, heart hammering in his chest. It felt ridiculous to be so nervous, but he could not ignore the spark of intrigue Olivia ignited in him. She was more than just a benefactor. There was a vulnerability in her that he found himself wanting to protect, even though she was the one with the power and resources. When her reply came a few hours later, it was brief but warm. "It was good to see you. Take care, Jake." He read it several times, a small grin tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt a twinge of excitement that had nothing to do with day-to-day survival. He sensed the start of something that might bring color back into both their lives. A slow crossing of two very different paths, bound by a single act of courage on an icy lake. Spring arrived in subtle ways, melting snow revealing patches of grass. Jake noticed birds chirping in the mornings, a sign of renewal that seemed to reflect his own emotional state. Max grew stronger, returning to school full-time, and even rejoining his after-school science club. Meanwhile, Jake settled back into his work routine with renewed vigor, though he still juggled both jobs. The difference was that he no longer felt trapped in a cycle of endless drudgery. There was a lightness to his step, a sense that tomorrow could hold unexpected possibilities. He and Olivia texted sporadically. Sometimes, days would pass without communication, then one of them would break the silence with a friendly check-in. Each exchange revealed small hints about her personality. She spoke about her love for classical piano, how she found solace in music. He joked about his clumsy attempts at cooking, which made her laugh. They did not dwell on their respective pains or tragedies, but there was an undercurrent of shared understanding that each had walked through darkness. One weekend, Jake decided to invite Olivia to a local fundraising event for the elementary school, a low-key fair with stalls, games, and a raffle. Max was eager to attend, and Jake thought it might be a light-hearted setting for Olivia to see a slice of normal life. He carefully typed out an invitation, half convinced she would say no. To his surprise, she agreed, with the caveat that she would keep a low profile. The day of the fair was clear and bright, the first truly warm day of the season. Families bustled around the school's parking lot, kids running from booth to booth with cotton candy in their hands. Jake and Max stood by a table displaying homemade crafts when they spotted Olivia arriving. She wore a casual sundress and a light jacket, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Jake saw the flicker of nervousness in her eyes as she merged into the crowd, but she mustered a small smile when she saw them. Max, who had heard bits and pieces about the mysterious friend who helped him, stared at Olivia with curious eyes. She knelt down, greeting him gently, and introduced herself as a friend of his dad's. Max offered a shy grin. "Dad said you like computers," he said, trying to find common ground. Olivia's lips curved in a genuine smile. "I do. Are you into them too?" Max shrugged, sheepish. "I like video games. Does that count?" Laughing softly. Olivia nodded. "That's a good start." Jake watched the exchange, heart swelling at how kindly Olivia interacted with his son. The air around them felt charged with a sense of something new and fragile, a moment of connection bridging worlds that rarely intersect. They wandered the fair together, sampling funnel cakes, tossing rings at bottles, and even trying a small Ferris wheel set up in the corner of the lot. Max insisted on riding with Olivia, leaving Jake in a separate seat, his eyes fixed on the two of them. A pang of emotion struck him as he watched Olivia gently reassure Max, who momentarily panicked when the ride swayed at the top. She exuded a tenderness that contradicted the aloof, reclusive image rumored about her. When they descended, Max hopped off, breathless and excited, while Olivia followed, looking exhilarated and slightly out of breath herself. A few hours later, as the fair wound down, they gathered by a picnic table. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. Max munched on a hot dog, thoroughly content. Olivia sipped a lemonade, her gaze drifting over the joyful chaos around them. "I haven't done something like this in years," she said quietly to Jake. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be around normal people, without any cameras or judgments." Jake smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. "I'm glad you came. You're welcome anytime, you know. People around here are good folks, just living their lives." Olivia nodded, but a shadow crossed her face. She glanced away, as if haunted by memories. Jake did not pry. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he murmured, "for getting Max a chance at life." She turned to meet his gaze. "Thank you," she countered, "for reminding me that people can be good, genuinely good, without expecting anything in return." Their eyes locked, and Jake felt a pulse of unspoken understanding pass between them. Max, oblivious to the moment, tugged on Jake's sleeve to point at a friend from school. The moment passed, but the closeness lingered, a subtle promise that there might be more to discover between them if they had the courage to face it. In the following weeks, Olivia visited a handful of times, each meeting arranged quietly to avoid attention. She and Max formed a bond over discussions about coding games and the latest sci-fi movies. Jake, watching from the sidelines, found his heart filled with cautious joy. He spent more moments talking with Olivia, learning about her life before her seclusion. Though she never delved into the exact tragedy that caused her to withdraw, she alluded to losing someone she loved deeply, a loss that paralleled Jake's experience. Their shared grief became an unspoken foundation for understanding each other's hearts. One warm afternoon, they took a stroll through a small park near Jake's home, Max skipping ahead along the winding path. Olivia glanced around at the playground, the families enjoying picnics. Her eyes flicked to Jake, who walked beside her. "I'm thinking of staying in town a bit longer," she said softly, "if that's okay with you." Jake felt his chest tighten with a surge of emotion. "I'd like that," he replied, carefully. He did not want to jump to conclusions, but her presence had already brought comfort to both him and Max in ways he never expected. They found a bench, half shaded by an old oak tree. From there, they could watch Max climbing the jungle gym, his laughter ringing out. Olivia leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "I spent years mistrusting everyone, convinced that all people cared about was money or what they could gain from me. Then you dove into that lake, not knowing who I was, risking your life. It shook me, made me question my assumptions. She paused, exhaling softly. Then I realized I had a chance to help your son, and I took it. Because I wanted to prove to myself that good can exist without a price tag. The difference is, you risked your life out of instinct. I had money and resources. It's not the same level of sacrifice. Jake shook his head. Don't belittle what you did. You saved Max's life. That's priceless to me. Whether it was money or skill, you used what you had to help us. That's all that matters. She turned to face him, eyes glistening. I'm too sorry I waited so long to meet you properly. I was afraid to trust, afraid you'd want to exploit my identity or demand more from me. Her voice faltered. Jake gently covered her hand with his. You have nothing to apologize for, he said. I'm the one who owes you thanks, and I'm grateful beyond words. I wouldn't trade meeting you for anything. And neither would Max. They sat in contemplative silence, letting the weight of unspoken feelings settle. Olivia cleared her throat and spoke again, voice shaky. I'm not sure what the future holds for me. Part of me wants to return to my old company, or maybe start something new here. But I do know I want to explore this connection, if you'll have me. Jake's heart soared. He nodded, swallowing the swell of emotion that rose in his throat. I'd like that a lot. In the months that followed, a gradual, deeply meaningful bond formed between them. Olivia found a modest house on the outskirts of town, close enough to visit Jake and Max without attracting attention. She used her resources discreetly to support local charities and improve the struggling community, always insisting on anonymity. Jake continued working, though now with a sense of hope that lightened his burdens. Max grew healthy and energetic, occasionally visiting Olivia's place to learn about her advanced tech projects or just to bake cookies in her luxurious kitchen. Despite her wealth, Olivia embraced the simplicity of the life Jake and Max led. She discovered joy in small acts, like picking apples at a local orchard or cheering from the sidelines at Max's soccer game. The entire town soon recognized her as a kind woman who had moved in quietly, though few knew her true identity. Over time, she grew more comfortable letting Jake see the cracks in her armor, sharing pieces of her past and the heartbreak that once made her flee the public eye. Jake, in turn, confided the lingering pain of losing his wife, the struggle to find meaning in life afterward. Through it all, their relationship deepened, woven by small daily acts of kindness and a mutual desire to protect and cherish each other. There were no dramatic headlines or paparazzi disruptions, just a quiet unfolding of two souls finding solace in each other's presence. One evening, as they all sat around Jake's wobbly kitchen table, finishing off a pizza, Max chattered happily about an upcoming science fair. Olivia smiled, reached under the table, and gently squeezed Jake's hand. In that squeeze, Jake felt a promise that their lives had become inextricably linked, forged by a moment of breathtaking risk on a frozen lake and sealed by a generosity that knew no limits. Slowly but surely, Olivia and Jake's worlds merged, each bringing life to the other. Jake taught her that trust and love can exist without conditions. She showed him that miracles can happen in unexpected ways. Over time, if anyone in town suspected Olivia was more than she seemed, they kept it to themselves, content with the knowledge that sometimes good people find each other when they need it most. In the end, a single act of courage had done more than save one life. It had saved three. For Jake, Olivia, and Max, the frozen lake at dawn would forever be the place where fate stepped in, carrying them toward a future none of them had dared to imagine. And in that future, hope blossomed where once there was only despair, proving that one selfless act can ignite a chain reaction of redemption and love.